the World Economic Forum has started and is grabbing headlines worldwide. It's becoming, the greatest news. But we want to look at the architecture or the security architecture as regards this conference. Reports have it that, the Swiss government has deployed about 5,000 army to join the local police, about 3,000 of them, and other security agencies to ensure that they provide security for this kind of meeting. I would like to have your take on how significant it is to deploy this level of security apparatus to this kind of conference, and then the sensitivity of issue of security when it comes to business relations or economic relations or the issue of investment.
Well, I think globally, the world faces a huge challenge, and then, of course, we also know why that challenge is there, and that is because of the inequities and the inequalities that are bound in the world where we live in. And you have the rich becoming more richer and the poor becoming poorer, and the rich taking advantage of the nature provided for the poor to become richer and leave them behind. This is the real issue, and this is why when you look at the thing, they talk about rebuilding trust. How do you build a trust? Because we're living in an age of an information overload. So it becomes absolutely very difficult to convince people that you are doing something otherwise. If you use our own local experience together, if you remember those years preceding the death of the Nigerian President then Abacha in 1998, when of course there was this 1 million man march that was organized. A lot of people from the Niger Delta were moved to go to Abuja to protest for the president to contest election, who was a military dictator at that time. And that was the offspring of militancy in the Niger Delta. Why there were pockets of agitation before that time for environmental sanity. But by the time you move these local boys to go and queue in Abuja and saw what money was doing, and it became obvious to them that this money was coming from oil, they wanted it right now and then. And that created a whole lot of distortions, which we are still facing today in Nigeria. This is the way we have to look at global peace. Now, when you look at the very poor of the poor that are resident in Africa, now you're looking at it from the point of view that the Middle East, take for example, Kuwait, Iran, Syria, and you are looking at all these, the Gulf region where all these crises are coming out from. You discovered God has endowed them with a lot of oil potential, Saudi Arabia. And this has built the whole of Europe and North America. And the people there are not living life to its fullest. And so what you see is a protestation from the very poor nation. So if you have to build trust, the very first thing that you have to do is to see how to invest massively in this environment, to see that you are not just pillaging them, but you are really very much interested in what they're doing. That's one way to look at it. Take, for example, after the Second World War, Professor Marshall gave a plan on how Europe should be rebuilt. And one of the issues that took place at that point was to see how to bind Europe together and make them a stronger Europe. And this was what led to what we popularly now call the Marshall Plan, which was the release of grants by the great powers then to Europe to build that economy. They didn't just give them loan, they gave them grants. And these were free money that was pumped into Europe economy. And this money they were using to rebuild. And of course, they also designed a plan such that the European countries can trade more with themselves and then be able to leverage the opportunities that are bound. And this was what built Europe. Most countries in the world where, of course, we are having these challenges, especially back in Africa and part of the Middle East, need such Marshall Plan. But what you see is that the Western powers still using the divide and the rule approach to dealing with issues that has to do with Africa. That's one. Now, if you're looking for trust, you also need to build what I'll call mutual respect for each other. Why will America come to Africa and say, because we don't want homosexuals, you don't want to do business with us? This is a problem. It's because you don't respect us. Now, if you do that across the globe, what you are simply saying is that, look, you don't have regard for anybody. So you can't talk about trust. Now, you also go to these issues of, we're talking about Ukraine crisis. Everybody is moralizing these issues. The real key question is the fact that America is still trying to establish its global supremacy. Why will America be wanting to go put a gunboat at the backyard of Russia by admitting Ukraine into the Allied powers, or NATO, as it is called? That's what is precipitating the Ukrainian war. That Russia is saying, this is our sphere of influence. So respect our sphere of influence. But America is not willing to respect the sphere of influence of the Russians. So what you get peace. And you are mobilizing resources to pull down Russia. And don't forget, Russia also have friends. So these are the issues that are precipitating the security challenge that the world faces. So for me, at the center is the United States of America and the European powers. So we need to be real sincere and genuine in terms of really building a world today that is all-encompassing. Nobody is saying that they should not have the advantage, but while you are taking resources from other people, you must ensure that you are giving them the opportunity to also grow. Otherwise, we'll be moving around the same circle, talking about trust and rebuilding trust.
All right. Now, since the focus yesterday was on achieving security and cooperation in a fractured world, and you've talked about the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Now, that's key among discussions as they talk about security. But there was a statement that is credited to the Swiss foreign minister, and he said that China plays a significant role. Now, he was referring to the restoration of peace as Ukraine presented a 10-point peace plan. What role exactly would China play, or can China play in this?
You see, China has become very significant to global power, and you cannot wish them away. And this is because they have also emerged, and they are becoming a superpower. After the humiliation from Britain through the gunboat, you know, many people don't remember the Opium War, how the Chinese were humiliated by the great powers and disempowered, so they didn't have military strength. Now, China is having both soft power and hard power, like every other thing. And then, of course, they are also asserting their rights. Especially you are having somebody who is ideologically oriented as the ruler of China. An ideology that is quite different from the American ideology. And so you are not going to tell him where he's going to bend. You cannot muzzle China today. It's not possible because they have been able to build power to a certain level. Whether it's in terms of wealth, whether it's in terms of technology, they have it and they can actually confront you. And where China swings because of the large size of their population and wealth is going to also determine what's going to happen. So what we're actually having is that we have left a multilateral world and we are drifting toward a bipolar world, which was what was in existence prior First World War and the Second World War. You have the Axis power and the Allied power all contesting. So it's either you are a communist bloc or you are in the capitalist bloc. That's where we are going toward right now. So you see a lot of people gravitating toward China because China has become the big brother with so much money to help develop nations. And we're talking about sports in Africa. You see China bringing in money, good money to help Cote d'Ivoire build stadium as in form of grant. Now, who do you think that Cote d'Ivoire will be loyal to if they were a strong power in the world? They'll be loyal to China. So China have a lot of following. And China also needs equity in the world. China wants to be represented, not by Taiwan in Security Council, based on its power. So these are issues that you have to look at. And so they are critical player The power is no longer residing in America alone. Power is also residing in some other places. And you're looking at smaller countries who are also building powers. And so they are teaching toward China. So China can give them ammunition. China can give them money. So see North Korea toward China. India is looking for help anywhere, so they can teach anywhere. So they can move toward Russia if that's where they can get their advantage from. So it's not about democracy, it's about the survival of the people. So people are playing survivor politics, and America must come to terms with this reality, that what is at stake is the survival of the people. And if people have to survive, then the need for equity in terms of how the world is governed is critical. First is to democratize the United Nations, where not just 5 countries, but the entire continents are represented in the Security Council with equal powers. So this is where, of course, we can be talking about security or talking about building of trust. So you have a world power who is advocating democracy, equality of right, but run a United Nations that is undemocratic.
All right. There's this sentiment that United States and all the European powers, set the agenda for the world. And then when you look at Africa, it's somehow missing out when it comes to the issue of inclusion now. What will you expect in a forum like this for African leaders to do to change the narrative? You have, world leaders gathering together to ensure that, the agenda about Africa is also being set on the table.
Yeah, I said this yesterday, and I'll keep emphasizing this. There's no other way to go about this is for Africa to rediscover itself, and we must realize and understand this real fact, that nobody's going to give you power. Our president said it during the campaign, power is not served a la carte. Nobody is going to have you sit down in a table and want to commit power into your hand. You have to take it. So this is what Africans should realize. And we must strategize and sit down around ourselves and make ourselves relevant in the scheme of things. And not live in the age of eugenics. Because we are still living in the age of eugenics, where the Western powers and the Americans feel that Africans, they are subhumans. And we are living and acting as if we are subhumans. And you look at the pillaging of our nations. We are not investing in education. We are not investing in health. We are not investing in infrastructure. You are seeing few people who have access to power steal the money and take it to Europe to develop Europe. Small countries like Switzerland that have no resources are doing excellently well with the wealth that is moved from Africa into this country. And this is where the conversations are. It's not about just having meetings. All the money that is developing Switzerland is coming from Africa. We are still having Abacha loot in Switzerland. And in natural law, if you receive stolen property, you are as guilty as the thief. Now, these are the real issues.
Blame Switzerland.
No. I'm not blaming Switzerland. And that's what I'm saying, that Africa needs to reinvent itself. We don't need to steal money to go and put in Switzerland to build Europe. We need to become Afrocentric in our thinking. We don't need to depend on Europe to grow. Africa must be deliberate in terms of setting an agenda for itself to say, we want to grow, we want to develop, and therefore, whatever it will take us to break out of poverty, we can. If countries like Singapore, countries like Malaysia, Thailand could break out of poverty, Africa can. And that's what we just need to do so that we can become relevant. Not going to conferences with a cap in hand begging for resources. We don't need that. We have everything, that God-given resource that is below the ground, above the ground, that Africa can mobilize and really grow itself. And then you can make yourself relevant and significant in the negotiation table. As long as we keep going to these places with cap in our hand begging for resources, there's really nothing. Nobody's going to respect you. Coming to beg you money or to borrow money from you. What respect do I have? Like the Holy Book says, a borrower is a slave to the lender.
All right, talking about Switzerland, what made them so significant to the world that it had to be picked for as the venue of the World Economic Forum year after year? That the forum has, the conference has assumed the name of the city. It's now called the Davos Conference. Why is Switzerland so significant to the world?
Yeah, you see, if you understand the history of the world and how the world had evolved, you come to realize that what really transformed Switzerland was the theology of men like John Calvin, Zwingli, who at the time were in Geneva and they were crying and praying and asking real God to transform the society. And of course, that happened that religion passed through Switzerland and they focus on how to live righteously. But like I say here every day, righteousness is what exalts a nation, sin is a reproach to any people. They became righteous and people were looking for how they can contribute to their society for development. And this was what was important. Volunteerism from everywhere, and they were able to build the economy that is based on righteousness. So you are not looking out for people who is stealing. And so what you have done by that is you create an ecosystem where your funds are safe, that if you bring your money here, nobody's going to steal it. So you have created that, personnel for yourself. And that's what Singapore has been able to do, Switzerland has been able to do, and create an environment where people feel safe and feel secure, that there's no crime. And it has gone down. And this has permeated their soul and their spirit. And so you are looking at a society that is free of crime, that is free of every form of fraud. And people know that if you put your things there, if it is 10, 100, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, the thing will be there and nobody's going to touch it. So this is what it is. And I think it's the value really that African society really need to also embrace, to see how we can create that ecosystem where people are trustworthy. That when we give people opportunity to lead us as governors, as president, as members of the House of Representatives, that is not all just for them to go sit down around the table and share the national or the commonwealth of the people, but they know that they also have the responsibility and they are accountable to the people, and this is what will build trust in our system. So we need to get African to that point where we exalt righteousness in the way we do things. And then, of course, crime goes down. Then you even see foreign powers who come to you to want to put money. And that's what has happened in Singapore. So what they did was to create an economic center where people know that, one, the ecosystem is safe. And you're also having to train people who are able to support the structure that you are building. And Switzerland has done that very well. And that's why they become as important as they are today, even though they have less of natural resources.
All right, still talking about the issue of security, what Blessing said earlier, provided a kind of background where it sees national security advisors from different countries, prior to the kickoff of the conference, came up with a 10-point agenda to seek resolution to the crisis ongoing in Ukraine, the one between Russia and Ukraine. What would you expect of the Ukrainian President Zelensky to do in a forum like this to mobilize resources or to ensure that he complements the 10-point peace agenda? What will you expect of him in a forum like this to do? What do you think should be his priority in a forum like this?
You see, from day one, since the Ukrainian war, I just felt that the president of Ukraine is relying on false hope from Europe and thinking that there's a way you can stand with Europe and then the whole of Europe and America bring their resources to you, and then you have to destroy your environment. You see, for me, really, it is for the president of Ukraine to drop the ambition and allow the status quo ante to remain. Whether you give conditions or 10 points that you say, oh, Europe is going to bring money, people should not have relations with Russia, that will solve the problem. The only way to peace, as far as I'm concerned, in this area, is that you understand that the power that you are dealing with, Russia is a strong world power. Strong world power. And they also have veto in United Nations. So you can't legislate them out, irrespective of what you're doing. And this is where, of course, for me, the Western country needs to pursue peace. and not war. This idea that you say you want to defeat Russia, for me, is a starry-eyed dream. What we need to do is to sit down with Putin, president of Russia. He has only one request. And that request is simple. Don't break the status quo. Therefore, don't admit Ukraine into NATO. Leave them where they are. And I think that solves the problem.
NATO will also be part of this conference, and it has been even since yesterday. What do you expect the position of NATO to be at this point?
You see, when you see NATO as an organization is struggling for relevance, as it is, they are only trying to assert themselves. And they must be able to move beyond the politics of the Second World War and know that we are in a new world. And this new world order, and there are multiplicity of powers across the globe. And of course, we need to respect each other. Not the way that because you won the First World War, you won the Second World War, and therefore you are hoping to win a Third World War. The dynamics have changed. And I think NATO needs to take this to heart and then play by the new rules and the new dynamics, that even smaller nations are becoming as powerful. Because today, what power is no longer reckoned by the size of your army or the size of the weapons that you command. And this is why you see that terrorism is festering in the world, because it's an asymmetrical war. You actually don't know where your opponent is coming from, and you don't even know what they have.
All right, let's come back home now. Let's talk about Nigeria now. We have our representatives there. We have the Vice President, you have the Minister of Finance, and the Coordinating Minister for the Economy, Wale Edo, a smaller team. What's your take, let me ask, of your opinion on this time around? You have a very smaller team representing Nigeria, unlike before where you have a large entourage and, going for this kind of forum. What does that suggest to you about the disposition of the present government about maybe cutting cost of governance? Is that significant for us to talk about it?
Yeah, it's quite significant because it's also to know that for me is one thing to make law and another thing to respect it. A circular came out last week, and the president says because of reducing costs for government that we are trying to reduce the entourage of the federal governors, ministers, and vice president. And on a sectorage, he said he cannot take more than 20 people on a single assignment, and for the president, 25 people. So this is, for me, you are living your word to say, okay, what do people really need to go and do in Davos, except to see we can have one common table as Africa, shop, where people can go out together and negotiate. For me, Davos is just a networking platform. And it's not more than that. And so as nation goes to Davos, they are not expecting anything tangible to come out of Davos. It's a talk shop. So we go there to negotiate. And so while the basic talk is going on and people are speculating how they feel the world can become safer, I think Nigerian delegation in Davos should be looking for people who have potentials that we can benefit from, who can bring foreign direct investment to us to be able to mitigate the infrastructure gap that we have in the country. That, for me, is what the essence of this conference is all about. And I think we must focus on the economic solution to our problem. And I still stand that there's a kind of a symbiotic relationship between poverty and crime. So if we are able to deal with the issue of poverty by creating more wealth and putting people up poverty line and creating opportunity for them to live, just like the old saying that if a man has nothing to live for, he can die for anything. So we have to create the opportunity that people have something that they want to live for. And they will not expose themselves to the dangers of either kidnapping, banditry, or terrorism. So this is where we need to focus and see how do we create that ecosystem where people who have genuine aspiration can find support. And those are the things that government can continue to work on. We have spoken to issues like addressing our basic macroeconomic challenges. How do we bring down inflation that is at today at 28.08%? How do we reduce the interest rate so that people can have access to credits, and that there are no too much of stringent measures? How do we open up our economic space to create more opportunities for people to be able to do business? How can we invite people to come around us and also create that sense of safety so that we have foreign direct investment flowing into Nigeria and creating wealth, and people can wake up in the morning and they are happy with their lives and they can move on? That reduces crime drastically. And I think that's where emphasis should be for us. So when we go out on such a forum, it's not for us to expect that there's something that they are going to give to you or hand that is going to fly from that thing, but we're supposed to speak to the world of the need for equity, the need for mutual respect. And this is all that I expect from our delegation in Davos.
All right. Talking about networking, which you said the World Economic Forum basically is. Now, there's also the talk about cooperation, which has to do with security as well, and the need for well-planned crisis response. Now, so as Nigeria, African countries, and other countries, we've been networking. What should be the focus regarding security? Because if you look at the issues highlighted when it comes to security, the pockets of insecurity going on in African countries were not mentioned as discussions. Is it because it's seen as they do not have, or they will not have, global implications? So how can African leaders at this point network to have the support of other countries? It could be in technology, it could be in intelligence, to have well-planned response to the crisis going on in Africa.
Yeah, you've answered it. So for me, it's because the crisis you see in Africa today really don't have any global impact that are severe. And that is what it is. So at the moment, what you're having in Africa, you're having people fighting themselves, too fighting. That's the way I want to describe the challenge in Africa. So one power will need power, the other one needs power, so they are fighting themselves, and that's the kind of crisis in Africa. But when you go to what is happening in the Middle East, you're seeing transnational issues. That you're seeing that nations are coming together and aggregating themselves toward a particular nation. And that is where, of course, the fear of a global war become real, so to speak. So here in Africa, what we're having is two fighting. So, but elsewhere in the world,
sounds very domestic.
yeah. So what you have elsewhere in the world is much more than that. And you're seeing that nations. Take for example, if you look at the crisis in Russia, you see it's not just Ukraine, Russia. That has crossed into Asia and has also dragged Europe into it. So the whole world is on it. Now, when you look at the crisis, for example, between the Hamas Israel challenge, you also see, because it's also attracting neighboring nations into it, because these elements are all in these nations, and they are aggregating and putting themselves together, and they have a common front to face the government. And this, of course, we have seen even in the attack on some ocean-going vessels that is, of course, trying to create some disruptions on the supply chain and the logistics across the globe. So these are things that are having global implication. So what you see in Africa, we don't have that kind of situation or scenario where what is happening in Nigeria, for example, is even affecting what's happening in the neighboring Benin Republic. So we don't have such crisis in Africa. And that's why I still feel that Africa, we are still safe. But we just need to put our house in order so we don't over-elevate politics at the expense of economic development. So if Africa can concentrate on its own issue, and take, for example, we can lawfully aspire to political office without necessarily have to go to hide in the bush and then be throwing arms here and there. African is in a better position to do this. And that's why a lot of people are also talking about the conspiracy theory. That, of course, some of the crisis that is here is just because some people are sponsoring it and creating that black spot to enable them to actually siphon what resources in Africa. So these for me are the real issues. So what we need to do as Africans is to address our local challenges, because our problems are local.